I just want to check my balance. The marble floors of Hale International Bank shone like still water, reflecting crystal chandeliers that hung from a ceiling so high it made people feel small the moment they walked in. The air smelled faintly of polished wood, expensive cologne, and quiet power. Every footstep echoed. Every whisper felt like it didn't belong. It was the kind of place where wealth moved silently, where suits were tailored, where voices were controlled, and where respect was reserved only for those who looked like they could afford it. That was why, when the doors slowly opened and a small, elderly black woman stepped inside, conversations faltered. Heads turned. And in more than a few eyes, judgment appeared before curiosity ever had the chance. Evelyn Carter was 90 years old. Her back was slightly bent, her steps careful, measured, supported by a simple wooden cane that had been polished smooth by decades of use. Her coat was old but clean. Her shoes were worn but neatly tied. There was nothing about her that matched the cold luxury of the building she had just entered, nothing except her eyes. They were sharp, steady, and filled with a quiet strength that came from surviving things most people only read about. She took 3 slow steps forward and stopped at the center of the massive lobby. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but clear. "I just want to check my balance." The words drifted across the room like a pebble dropped into glassy water. A few customers glanced up from their phones. A pair of businessmen near the espresso bar smirked. Somewhere behind the reception desk, a stifled laugh escaped. And then, from near the private banking area, came a louder sound. Laughter. Not warm, not surprised, it was sharp, confident, entertained. Richard Hale, 42 years old, founder and CEO of Hale International Bank, stood adjusting the cuff of his custom Italian suit. He was tall, athletic, groomed in the kind of way money allows a man to be. His bank had just broken another quarterly profit record. His name had recently appeared on the cover of a financial magazine under the headline "The Young King of Modern Banking." To most people in the building, Richard Hale was not just wealthy, he was untouchable. When he laughed, others followed. Richard turned slightly so the entire lobby could see his face. "Ma'am," he said, his tone falsely polite, loudly amused, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is a private international bank. Our minimum account threshold is higher than most people's annual income." A ripple of quiet laughter spread. Someone coughed to hide a smile. A woman in pearls raised her hand to her mouth. Evelyn didn't move. She adjusted her grip on her cane and met his eyes from across the marble floor. "Young man," she said calmly, "I didn't ask where I was. I said I'd like to check my balance." Richard glanced at the simple black card in her hand when she slowly raised it. It wasn't shiny. It wasn't gold. The edges were softened with age. To him, it looked outdated, cheap, almost symbolic rather than real. He let out another small laugh. "That card doesn't even match our current system," he said. "We upgraded 10 years ago." "I'm aware," Evelyn replied. That only amused him more. He waved one hand toward the reception desk without looking away from her. "Someone please help this woman find the correct bank, or perhaps a customer service number for senior assistants." A few customers openly laughed now. Evelyn felt it, the heat of humiliation, the familiar burn in the chest. It was a feeling she had carried before on segregated buses, outside hospital doors, in offices where she cleaned but was never seen. She had buried friends who were never given the dignity of being called victims. She had watched the world change slowly, painfully, inch by inch. And she had learned something along the way. Silence can be louder than shouting. She stood there unmoving while 2 security guards hesitantly stepped closer. They were younger men, uncomfortable, trained to obey. "Ma'am," one said gently, "Mr. Hale would like us to escort you outside." Evelyn turned her head slightly and looked at him, not angrily, not fearfully. "I didn't say I was leaving," she replied. "I said I wanted to check my balance." Richard scoffed. "You see," he said loudly, This is why we have security. Confused people come in, they don't understand where they are, and then they waste everyone's time. A woman near the investment desks leaned to her companion. "It's sad," she whispered, not quietly enough. "My grandmother was like that at the end." Something unexpected happened then. Evelyn smiled. Not a weak smile, not an embarrassed one, it was slow, full, heavy with memory. "You think I'm confused," she said gently. Richard lifted his eyebrows. "Ma'am," with respect. She let out a soft laugh that surprised even herself. "With respect," she repeated. "That's a word I haven't heard in rooms like this for most of my life." The lobby quieted slightly. "I remember," Evelyn continued, "the first time I stood in a place that smelled like this. Marble, cigars, money. It was 1955. I was 15 years old, and I was scrubbing the floors of a private office at night so my mother and I could eat." Richard's smile faded just a fraction. "I worked 14 hours some days," she went on. "School in the morning, cleaning at night. Your grandfather liked to leave his cigarette burning on the desk just to see if I would complain about the smell. I never did." The air shifted. Richard straightened. "My grandfather," he repeated. "Yes," Evelyn said, her eyes steady. "Henry Hale, founder of this bank." A murmur rippled through the lobby. "I polished his floors," she said. "I emptied his trash. I watched him build this place brick by brick while people like me were told we could never enter it unless we were carrying a mop." Richard's jaw tightened. "You expect me to believe you cleaned my grandfather's office?" "I don't need you to believe me," Evelyn replied. "I lived it." Silence spread. The guard stopped moving. Evelyn slowly lowered her cane and reached into her coat. She didn't rush. She pulled out a folded, fragile photograph. The edges were yellowed. She held it up. It showed a young black girl standing beside an older white man in a suit, both in front of a half-built bank building. On the back, barely visible, was a handwritten note. "First Hale Office, 1956. Richard's breath caught without his permission. "That girl," Evelyn said, tapping the photo, "is me." The lobby had fully gone quiet now. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it again. Evelyn looked around at the polished walls, the expensive people, the guards, the receptionists, and finally back at him. "So yes," she said softly, "I'd like to check my balance." For the first time since she had entered, Richard didn't laugh. Because something had begun to shift inside him. And he didn't yet know why. The name in the system. The silence in the lobby did not break all at once. It cracked slowly, like thin ice under a cautious step. A few people shifted their weight. Someone cleared their throat. The espresso machine hissed softly in the background, suddenly too loud for a room that moments ago had been filled with quiet laughter. Richard Hale was still standing where he had been, but something in his posture had changed. His shoulders were no longer relaxed. His jaw no longer carried amusement. His eyes were fixed on the photograph in Evelyn Carter's hand, and despite every instinct telling him this woman could not matter, something in his chest refused to stay calm. "You're saying," he began, then stopped, irritated that his voice did not sound as controlled as it usually did. "You're saying you worked for my grandfather." Evelyn carefully folded the photograph and returned it to her coat. "I'm saying I helped build this place with my hands while people like you were being taught how to own it." A murmur moved through the lobby. Phones were slowly lowered. Conversations had fully died. Even the guards looked unsure now, glancing not at Evelyn but at Richard. Richard exhaled and turned sharply toward the main desk. "Pull up her account," he said. The head teller hesitated. "Sir, her card." "I said pull it up." The teller swallowed and nodded, motioning Evelyn forward. As she approached the counter, a few customers stepped aside, not out of courtesy but confusion. Evelyn felt their eyes on her back. The old familiar weight of being watched, measured, doubted. She rested her cane against the counter and slid the black card forward. The teller typed and paused. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then slowly she typed again. Her face changed. "Is there a problem?" Richard asked. I need a supervisor," the teller said quietly. "I am the supervisor," Richard snapped, stepping closer. "What's on the screen?" The teller turned the monitor slightly toward him. At first, Richard didn't understand what he was seeing, not because it was complicated, but because it contradicted everything he expected. He leaned closer. The account wasn't empty. It wasn't small. It wasn't even large. It was impossible. The first number alone made no sense. He blinked once, then again. "That's not right," he said. The teller shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "The system, it's not lagging, it's not an error." The screen showed an active private institutional account, opened in 1961, never closed, never transferred, never frozen. The balances extended beyond personal savings, beyond business portfolios, the kind of structure usually reserved for foundations, trusts, and international endowments. Richard straightened slowly. "Who authorized this account?" The teller scrolled, her breath caught. "Sir, the original authorization is signed by Henry Hale." The lobby reacted before Richard did. A ripple of sound, disbelief, confusion. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else said, "That can't be real." A man near the investment desks quietly stood up. Richard's eyes were locked on the screen. His grandfather's signature stared back at him, digitized from a document over 60 years old. He recognized it instantly. He had seen it framed in boardrooms, on founding charters, on legacy plaques. His voice came out lower. What is this account?" The teller scrolled again. "It's classified under a historical private trust. It's connected to multiple corporations, real estate holdings, education funds, development grants." Richard slowly turned his head toward Evelyn. She was watching him. Not proudly. Not angrily. Patiently. "You see," she said gently, "after I cleaned your grandfather's office, I worked in kitchens, then hospitals, then schools. I listened. I learned. I saved. And when people told me women like me couldn't invest, couldn't own, couldn't build, I did it quietly." Richard felt heat crawl up his neck. "You're saying this account is yours?" "It's always been mine," Evelyn said. "Your grandfather helped me open it, not because he was kind, because I caught him hiding money from his partners. He gave me a choice, silence or security." A stunned breath moved through the room. "I chose both," she continued. "I never took from him. I invested what I earned, and I never forgot where I came from." Richard's mouth was dry. "This balance," he said, "it's tied into systems even I don't personally oversee." "That's because I never needed your permission," Evelyn replied softly. The teller swallowed. "Sir, according to this, Mrs. Carter is one of the bank's oldest living institutional partners." The words hit like a dropped glass. "Partner?" The lobby no longer saw an old woman. They saw a disruption. Richard took a step back without meaning to. "And you laughed at me," Evelyn said quietly. Her words were not sharp. That was what made them heavier. "I didn't come here to embarrass you," she continued. "I came here because after 90 years, I wanted to know what my balance was, not in money, but in truth." She lifted her eyes around the room. "And now everyone knows." Richard felt the weight of every stare. For the first time in his life, the power in the room was not standing where he thought it belonged. When the past refuses to stay buried, the quiet did not last. It never does when truth enters a place built on assumptions. At first it was only whispers. Then phones began to rise almost instinctively, like people lifting lanterns in a dark cave. Someone near the waiting area murmured, "Is this real?" Another said, "That's Richard Hale." Another, "That old woman owns part of the bank." The head teller's hands were shaking now. She minimized the screen as if hiding it could make what it showed disappear. But it was too late. A junior manager had already stepped back, eyes wide, whispering into her headset. Somewhere upstairs, a door opened. Then another. Richard felt it before he understood it. Control was slipping. He turned sharply toward Evelyn, lowering his voice. "We should take this to a private office." Evelyn met his gaze. "No," she said gently. "I spent my life being taken to back rooms so other people could stay comfortable. Today we speak where everyone can hear." A man in a navy suit pushed through the growing circle. "Mr. Hale," he said urgently, "security reports someone has alerted press across the street." Richard closed his eyes briefly. He had built his reputation on transparency campaigns, diversity statements, inclusion speeches. He had posted photos shaking hands with community leaders. He had donated millions to public causes. And yet he had just laughed at a 90-year-old woman for wanting to check her balance. The glass doors at the front of the bank reflected movement now. Camera lenses, microphones, curious faces. Evelyn watched the reflection. "They always come late," she murmured, "but they always come." Richard looked back at her. "Why now?" he asked, his voice not angry anymore but unsettled. "If you have this kind of power, why walk in here like that?" "Because power unused for truth is only decoration," Evelyn replied. "And because some lessons need witnesses." The first reporter entered, breathless. Then another. Questions collided in the air. "Mr. Hale, is it true? Who is this woman? Is the bank hiding?" Richard raised a hand, but his authority no longer had its usual gravity. Evelyn stepped forward. "My name is Evelyn Carter," she said, her voice soft, but somehow carrying. "I cleaned this building before most of you were born. I invested when people like me were told we couldn't. And today I asked a simple question and was treated like I didn't belong." Cameras leaned in. "I don't want his job," she continued, nodding once toward Richard. "I don't want his apology. I want people to see how easy it is to forget respect when you think you're above someone." Richard swallowed. A reporter turned to him. "Mr. Hale, did you know your grandfather helped open an account for Mrs. Carter?" "No," he admitted. "Did you know she is an institutional partner?" "No." "Then why did you laugh?" The question cut deeper than any accusation. Richard looked at Evelyn, then at the crowd. "Because," he said slowly, "I judged her before I knew her." Evelyn watched him. "And that," she said, "is where harm always begins." Inside the bank's internal systems office, alarms were quietly lighting up. Old archives were being accessed. Legacy files long untouched were opening. A compliance officer rushed down the stairs, pale. "Sir," he whispered to Richard, "there's more. Mrs. Carter's account is connected to a foundation, one that's been funding half our community impact programs." Richard's head snapped toward him. "The Carter Educational Trust," the officer continued. "It predates the Hale Foundation by 20 years. Evelyn nodded. "Every scholarship you've ever advertised," she said calmly. "Every outreach banner hanging in this lobby, that was my money. I just never put my face on it." The words didn't explode. They sank. People in the lobby were crying now. A woman pressed her hand to her mouth. One of the guards looked away, eyes wet. Richard felt something collapse quietly inside his chest. He had given speeches under banners funded by the very woman he had dismissed. "You let me take credit," he said. Evelyn shook her head. "No, I let the good be done. Credit was never the point." She turned slightly so the cameras could see her face. "I came today because I'm 90, she said. "And when you reach 90, you start caring less about how polite injustice looks." Richard exhaled, unsteady. The bank no longer felt like his kingdom. It felt like a classroom. And he had just realized he was not the teacher. The woman behind the foundations. The lobby of Hale International Bank no longer felt like a financial institution. It felt like a public square. Reporters lined the marble floor, voices low but urgent, cameras humming like insects. Employees stood frozen behind counters, no longer workers but witnesses. Outside, the glass doors reflected flashing lights. The city had begun to listen. Richard Hale sat in a leather chair he had never used before in an office he had never needed. Across from him, Evelyn Carter rested both hands on her cane, her posture calm, her presence unshaken. He had offered her water. She had declined. He had offered privacy. She had smiled and said, "Privacy is where too many things have been hidden." A compliance officer, two archivists, and a legal advisor stood by the desk. Files lay open. Real paper, dust-scented history. "Mrs. Carter," one archivist said softly, "your trust network is extraordinary. Housing developments, minority business grants, hospital wings, education programs across 3 states. Evelyn nodded slowly. "I built what I was denied." Richard looked up. "Why didn't you ever take public credit?" She met his eyes. "Because when a black woman funds a school, they call it charity. When a white man funds one, they call it legacy." The words settled heavily. "You were funding our largest projects," Richard said quietly, "without ever stepping into the spotlight." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Spotlights burn. I preferred to build lamps." An assistant hurried in, whispering that several national outlets were requesting statements. Richard didn't answer. He was staring at a document dated 1968. "Is this true?" he asked. "You helped finance the East Harbor rebuild." "Yes." "That project saved thousands of families." "And displaced thousands more," Evelyn replied. "So I funded the housing that followed." He flipped another page. "These scholarships." "Paid for nurses," she said. "Engineers, teachers, people who would never be invited into rooms like this without proving twice what others were born into." Richard leaned back slowly. The empire he thought he had built felt suddenly borrowed. "You stood there today," he said, "and I laughed at you." Evelyn's voice was gentle. "No, you laughed at a story you thought you knew." One of the guards knocked lightly. "Sir," he said, eyes lowered, "the staff is asking if Mrs. Carter would like the executive elevator." Evelyn glanced at Richard. "Do you see how fast doors open once a number changes?" Richard felt shame flush through him. Outside the office, the bank's massive digital display still looped the slogan, "Hale International, where legacy lives." Evelyn looked at it through the glass. "Legacy isn't marble," she said, "it's memory." A young intern approached hesitantly, holding a thin, fragile book. "We found this in the archival vault," she said. "It's labeled E. Carter." Evelyn reached for it. Inside were handwritten logs, investment notes, names, places, tiny clipped articles, and pressed between 2 pages a yellowing employee badge. "Evelyn Carter, night cleaning staff." Richard's throat tightened. "That badge let me in through back doors," Evelyn said, "but these pages let me walk through front ones." He stood. "Not as a CEO. As a man." "I owe you more than an apology," he said. She studied him. "Good, because apologies without action are just performance." Richard nodded slowly. "What would you have me do?" he asked. Evelyn closed the book. "You built a bank," she said. "Now build understanding. Start by making this place what you pretend it already is." Outside, chants had begun, not angry but curious. A crowd forming not for scandal but story. Evelyn rose carefully to her feet. "I didn't come here to tear you down," she said. "I came to remind you who you're standing on." Richard felt the truth of it. For the first time, he did not feel rich. He felt responsible. The moment the world was watching. By the time Richard Hale stepped out of the private office, the lobby of his bank no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the world. News vans lined the street outside. Cables snaked across the marble floor like veins. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder. Employees had gathered along the upper balconies. The hum of voices, cameras, and distant sirens blended into a low, constant roar. What had begun as a quiet insult had become a public reckoning. Evelyn Carter walked beside him. Not behind. Not escorted. Beside. Richard noticed it immediately, and he did not correct it. A reporter pushed a microphone forward. "Mr. Hale, is it true you dismissed one of your bank's oldest partners because of her appearance?" Richard stopped walking. The room stilled. He felt every instinct urge him to deflect, to issue a polished statement, to frame it as misunderstanding, to protect the brand. Instead, he turned slightly toward Evelyn. "Yes," he said, "I did." A wave of murmurs rolled through the lobby. "I saw an old woman," he continued, voice steady but raw. "I did not see a builder. I did not see a partner. I did not see the hands that helped create the very programs my company celebrates." He looked directly at the cameras. "And that failure is mine." Another reporter spoke. "What are you going to do about it?" Richard inhaled. Then slowly, deliberately, he stepped away from the center podium and gestured toward Evelyn. "She is going to speak," he said. 100 cameras turned. Evelyn did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. "For 90 years," she said, "I have watched people decide who I was before they ever asked. Today was not special. It was familiar. The only difference is today you saw it." She lifted her eyes to the balconies, the employees. "I was not hurt today," she continued. "I was revealed, and so were others." Richard stood behind her now. "Not leading. Listening." "I built what I could because I had to," Evelyn said. "But no one should have to build quietly just to be treated gently." She turned slightly, looking at the massive digital display overhead. "Respect," she said, "should not require proof of purchase." The room broke into applause. Not loud. Deep. Sustained. Richard felt something inside him crack, not painfully but honestly. He stepped forward again. "Effective immediately," he said, "Hale International Bank will be restructuring its leadership ethics program, its hiring authority, and its public foundations." His legal advisor stiffened. Richard continued. "And Mrs. Evelyn Carter will not be a hidden partner any longer. She will be offered a permanent advisory role over our community development and equity divisions." The reporters erupted with questions. Evelyn raised one hand. "I don't want a title," she said. "I want a door that doesn't close when I'm gone." Richard looked at her. "Then help me build it," he said quietly. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Outside, the crowd began chanting her name. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. "I didn't come here to be famous," she said. "I came to check my balance." A soft ripple of laughter moved through the room. "And what is it?" a reporter asked. Evelyn smiled. "Today," she said, "it's heavier with truth than it was when I walked in." Richard turned to her. "Let me make this right." She studied him. "Then don't make it about me." He nodded. In that moment, the millionaire did not look powerful. He looked changed. The balance that truly mattered. The storm did not fade when the cameras left. It deepened. In the weeks that followed, Hale International Bank became a place of reckoning. Internal reviews were launched. Training programs were rewritten. Long-sealed hiring records were opened. Executives who had never been questioned were suddenly being asked not about profit, but about people. And in the center of it all, moving quietly through hallways once forbidden to her, was Evelyn Carter. She did not take an office. She took a table. right in the open, near the front windows, where employees passed, where interns hesitated, where visitors could see her. She listened. She read. She asked questions that no one had ever asked before. Who feels invisible here? Who cleans this building at night? Who decides who belongs? Richard Hale often stood nearby, no longer followed by an entourage, but by a notebook. He watched her speak to tellers like equals, to guards like brothers, to janitors like family. And slowly the bank's culture began to bend, not because policies demanded it, but because presence taught it. One afternoon, Richard found Evelyn looking out through the glass doors at the busy street. "They smile at me differently now," she said. "Yes," he replied. "They see money," she added. Richard hesitated. "They should see you." She smiled faintly. "That takes longer." Under Evelyn's guidance, the hidden Carter Educational Trust was formally revealed, not as a branding tool, but as a living archive. Scholarships were renamed after workers, not donors. Buildings were dedicated not to executives, but to communities. Hale International's largest new initiative was not a financial product. It was called the Open Door Program. Its mission was simple. No client, applicant, or visitor could be dismissed, redirected, or denied service based on appearance, age, race, or status, without direct accountability from leadership. On the day it launched, employees filled the lobby. So did people from the neighborhoods Evelyn had built in. So did those who had once been told to leave places like this. Evelyn stood at the same spot where she had first rested her cane. Richard stood beside her. "I came here to check my balance," she said. A soft ripple of emotion moved through the crowd. "I found something heavier," she continued. "I found proof that dignity doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It waits." She turned to Richard. "And I found a man brave enough to look at himself." Richard felt his throat tighten. He stepped forward. "My grandfather built this bank," he said, "but Evelyn Carter built its conscience." He reached into his jacket and removed a small black card. He placed it in her hand. "Your original account card," he said, "restored not for access, for remembrance." Evelyn traced its edge. "I don't need doors anymore," she said. "I need seeds." 3 months later, Hale International's annual report shocked the financial world. Not because of profits, because of purpose. The final page was not a chart. It was a photograph. Evelyn Carter sitting at her table, surrounded, listening. The caption read, "Balance is not what you have. It is what you change." On a quiet afternoon, Evelyn returned one last time to the lobby, not for press, not for meetings. Just to sit. Richard approached. "What's your balance today?" he asked gently. She looked around. At the guards who smiled. At the teller who greeted her by name. At the open doors. "At 90, she said, "you stop counting money." He waited. "I'm rich in witnesses," she finished. And for the first time in his life, Richard Hale understood that the greatest account he would ever manage was not in a system, but in the hearts of the people he chose to honor.